Today, we're diving into something that sounds almost impossible, a rule book for war. But it's true. There are two core sets of laws that try to bring some order to the chaos. One governs how war is fought, and the other protects who gets caught in the middle. Let's break it down.
So let's just ask it straight up. In the middle of all that chaos, in the heat of battle, are there actually rules? The answer, and this might surprise you, is a definite yes. And they're rules that are recognized by nearly every single nation on Earth.
So what do we call this whole rulebook? Well, it has a formal name, International Humanitarian Law, or IHL for short. And its whole reason for existing? To put some limits on the absolute devastation of armed conflict.
Okay, so think of this entire legal system as being built on two massive pillars. They're connected, for sure, but they deal with totally different things. You've got the Hague regulations on one side and the Geneva Conventions on the other. All right, if you remember just one thing from this whole explainer, make it this. Geneva law is all about protecting the who, the victims of war. And Hague law, that regulates the how, the actual methods and means of fighting. Let's start with the how. So let's tackle that first pillar, Hague law. Think of this as the fighter's rulebook. It's the part that lays out what is, and just as importantly, what is not, considered acceptable conduct on the actual battlefield. Now, you might be wondering where these rules even came from. Well, they didn't just pop up overnight. They actually grew out of this big international push for peace, way back at the turn of the 20th century. There were these major conferences held in a city called The Hague in the Netherlands, and, well, that's where the regulations got their name. At their core, the Hague regulations are all about drawing a line in the sand. They basically say, nope, you can't just do anything you want. It was the world's way of trying to stop that anything-goes mentality in a conflict. So what does that actually look like? Well, it gets really specific. We're talking about outright banning things, like using poison. It makes it totally illegal to kill an enemy who is clearly surrendered. And maybe most importantly, it established this key idea of distinction, the rule that fighters have to make a real effort to tell the difference between other fighters and civilians. All right, so that's the how, the fighter's rulebook. Now let's pivot to that other pillar, the Geneva Conventions. And this one has a totally different mission. It's purely humanitarian, focused 100% on protecting people. And what's so incredible about these laws is where they came from. They weren't cooked up by lawyers in some stuffy room. Nope. They were born from the absolute horror one man, Henry Dunant, witnessed on a battlefield. He saw thousands of wounded soldiers just left to die, and he knew something had to change. And that backstory really gets to the heart of what the Geneva Conventions are all about. They exist to protect people who are hors de combat. That's a French phrase that literally means out of the fight. And that could be anyone not actively fighting, a wounded soldier, a captured prisoner, or, of course, a civilian. In 1949, after the devastation of World War II, these protections were seriously updated and expanded into the four main conventions we know today. You can see how they build on each other. First, protecting wounded soldiers on land, then at sea. The third convention lays out all the rules for prisoners of war. And finally, the fourth one provides sweeping protections for all civilians caught in wartime. 196. Just think about that number for a second. That's how many countries have signed on to the Geneva Conventions. That's basically every single nation on Earth. It makes them one of the most universally accepted international agreements in history. It's the world saying yes, even in war there are some things you just cannot do. Okay, so we've got Hague law covering the how, and Geneva law covering the who. But the big question is, how do these two different sets of rules actually fit together? Well, when you put them side by side, it becomes super clear. The Hague regulations, that's the fighter's rulebook, focusing on weapons and tactics. The Geneva Conventions, that's like the medic's code, all about humane treatment. One governs the fight itself, while the other protects the people caught up in it. They're two essential sides of the same coin. And when you lock those two pieces together, what do you get? You get the foundation of modern international humanitarian law. It's a system built not on wishful thinking, but on a really practical and powerful idea: to limit the sheer brutality of war and hold on to at least a little piece of our shared humanity. But let's be real. In a world full of messy, modern conflicts, you might be asking yourself, do these old documents really still matter? And the answer is a resounding yes. They might matter now more than ever. Look, the whole point of these laws isn't to make war okay or acceptable. It's the exact opposite. They are a global agreement that even when humanity is at its absolute worst, there are still lines. There are lines that we all agree must never be crossed.
And that leaves us with a huge challenge, right? As warfare changes, with autonomous drones, cyber attacks, all kinds of new threats, the question isn't just about knowing these rules, it's about how we adapt them, how we enforce them. And how we answer that question? Well, that's going to define just how much humanity we're willing to fight for in the conflicts to come.